Thank you to everyone for being here during finals week. We are very excited to have Christoph Boesch with us this week. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in just a moment. But we have the new BEF website at bef.ucla.edu that should be up and live in about a week. And that will have the complete list of all of the talks for winter quarter, which have now been scheduled, and at least the list of speakers, if not their abstract, should be up very shortly. So we have an exciting lineup of speakers coming up in the winter. And I think that's all for announcements for this quarter. We appreciate you all being here. We've had plenty of generous sponsors, including some whose representatives are sitting here now at the Center for Society and Genetics and the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, the Department of Anthropology. So we are pleased to have Christoph Boesch, who is the director of the Department of Primatology at the Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig. And he's going to talk to us today about the ecology of cooperation and altruism.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's working. So first, I want to wish you all a very bon appetit for your meal. I will have the pleasure to admire you when you are going to eat. The kind of an altruistic behavior from my side. So I'm going to talk to you on the ecology of cooperation and altruism. Yes, I have a different screen than usual, that's why I was kind of hesitating a minute. Cooperation has long been considered as a very important behavior in our own evolution, whereby we think that part of our main characteristics have been able to develop through this kind of behaviors that you have here idealistically represented. Human cooperation during the hunting, with then afterwards wide distribution of the success of the hunting between all group members. And this has been considered to play an important role in our early human ancestors through hunting, man the hunter. I think most of you have heard about it also. And then with this division of labor that has been considered to be central, where different contribution of different individuals within group were then shared between members. Here you have another one of those idealistic representations with women in the center or in the left, where gathering products are also exchanged between group members. The theory about evolution of social behavior has concentrated on four main types of behaviors: selfish altruism, cooperation, and spite, and has been classically defined from the perspective of the actor, where two types of behaviors, the selfish one and the cooperative ones, would be easy to understand because it brings a direct benefit to the actor, whereas altruism and spite would be, from a Darwinian point of view, much more difficult to understand. However, recently, some people have actually taken more a focus on the recipient side and have actually sometimes been using altruism and cooperation interchangeably, so that some people talk about cooperation when they actually mean altruism. And I would like to keep these distinctions for our understanding of what the evolution could work. You all know about the Hamilton rules that have been proposed by Hamilton in order to understand originally the honeybee social structure and why you have these sterile workers in such a colony. And so his emphasis was on this little r, which is a coefficient of relatedness in this formula. And based on that, we have the kin selection argument that was used. I want here to remind you that in the formula we have the cost and the benefit that are still represented. And these two aspects of this formula represents actually what the ecological conditions are where this interaction is taking place. Recently, Nature reminded us, when I was actually writing this talk, that researchers working in altruism must learn to cooperate, which is a kind of my little contribution of hopefully leading to some clarity and maybe make cooperation between us researchers more easy. Examples of animal cooperations have been very numerous in the literature. As I mentioned, the honeybee was the big classical example, is still a very important example mentioned in all textbooks about kin selection. We know in the meantime the situation is not always so easy, but it's still remaining as one of the examples. I'm taking the hyenas here. Other examples of collaborative hunting has been present in the literature and has been shown that actually the number of hunters may directly contribute to increase the hunting success and would be a typical cooperative examples. Some people have actually proposed, and that has been a long discussion about the lions, that actually some of the cooperation we observe is not cooperation in the sense of bringing a benefit to the member of this hunting group, but is a kind of a byproduct of sociality, the fact that animals are living anywhere together and doing therefore behavior together may lead to this kind of behaviors. So actually I could finish my talk now in the sense that we seem all to agree that cooperation, altruism is observed in animals, and that's it. Recently, however, there has been a renewed interest in cooperation and altruism because people have started to claim that cooperation and altruism is actually uniquely human, and that the type of behavior we see in non-human animals cannot be accepted or should not be classified as cooperative or altruism. I'm just taking a few examples from the literature to kind of illustrate this. Ernest Fair and has in many publications addressed the question of human altruism or cooperation. He is one of those researchers who will be using the term of cooperation when often he's actually meaning altruism. And as is, I have no PowerPoints, but as he's saying here, unlike other creatures, humans frequently cooperated with genetically unrelated strangers, often in large groups, with people they will never meet again, and reputation gains are small and absent. So in this way, it's kind of presenting it as an obvious fact that other animals don't show this kind of cooperation. However, all his work has been done with students from the University of Zurich. And from this very specific sample size, being myself Swiss, I can tell you it's a very specific sample size. From this very specific sample size, he has, always has this kind of title, altruistic punishment in humans, and always generalizing from this sub-population of humans, if you want. Robert Boyd in 2006 made another of these paper discussing the puzzle of human sociality, and here in the introduction is kind of taking in contrast. In other primate species, cooperation is limited to relative and small group of reciprocators. There is little division of labor. No one cares for the sick or feeds the hungry and disabled. The strong take from the weak without fear and sanctioned by third parties. So there has been this kind of strong arguments in humans, from the human perspective, that things are very different. Here a very famous paper from John. Chimpanzees are indifferent to the welfare of unrelated group members, whereby actually this title suggests they have been working on chimpanzees in many different living conditions, a large sample size, and it's basically actually based on only 2 captive groups. Similar example, chimpanzees are rational maximizers in ultimate game, and here again you can see at the end, these results support the hypothesis that any other regarding preference and aversion to inequity outcomes, which play key roles in human social organizations, distinguishes us from our closest living relative. And here, just to make it clear, all these studies are based uniquely on captive subjects. Mike Tomasello, who has his lab 1 floor below mine, is saying here again very strongly that the crucial difference between human cognition and that of other species is the ability to participate with others in collaborative activities with shared goals and shared intentionality. So you see that there has been a strong move in the literature and in some very high-profile scientific journals to claim that we have a major difference, one-side humans that would cooperate, show altruism, and all the other animal species where we have another type of behaviors. Why do we see such a situation? So my proposition here is that we have a very strong underestimation of ecology. Let me try to explain it. I think we have really, what we observe here is 2 basic different approaches. On one side, what I've called now, I've changed a little bit the terms. In the first publication I said it was a deterministic approach. I like to use Cartesian approach. It reminds us of René Descartes, who was kind of saying animals are machines. And the argument, if you want, of René Descartes, maybe he didn't think it in that broad sense, but the argument is, well, as animals are machines, basically it doesn't matter under which conditions animals are living, because whatever number of a few individuals you would take from one species, you would know that this one is representative for the whole of the species. And therefore you have this kind of expectations that whatever the socio-economic conditions under which these individuals have been living, being it very simple like it would be in captive conditions, or being a very complex tropical rainforest, wouldn't make a difference on the way these individuals would develop their cognitive abilities. And I know that people will not claim that they are Cartesian, but I personally certainly feel that the general acceptance in some circles of captive data as representative for the whole of a species is based on this assumption that the ecology is not very important in the development of cognitive conditions in animal species. On the other side, you have a more Darwinian approach where the ecology plays a very important role, and where you would actually predict that under very simple, easy socio-ecological niche, the cognitive abilities individuals will develop will be less sophisticated than if you live in much more complex socio-ecological conditions. So basically, from a Darwinian approach, the fact that you will see differences within a species between the cognitive level reached between populations is not only not a surprise, it's actually something that we would predict. so that actually we need to remind us that cognition is actually, an ecological adaptation. That individuals develop cognitive cognition to solve daily challenges they face. And that's a very important aspect. So let me review some of the evidence that I think are available in the literature showing that the ecology plays a very important role in the way we humans cooperate or are altruist with other group members. Oh shit, sorry. I assume you know already what the dictator game is. Basically, there has been a lot of work being done using economic games to try to understand the way we humans and animals interact with others when it comes to altruism and cooperation. And one of these games is a dictator game. Quickly, you give to one individual a certain amount of money, you tell him that there is another individual on the other side of whatever it is, and you have to give him some of your money. And in the dictator game, that's all what you tell him. And he can give. If you have the assumption that humans are actually selfish and should behave only in their own personal interest, then you make the prediction that the individual will never give anything to somebody else. And if you do your experiments in the US or in Europe, you have, on the average, this kind of result. Over 40% of the money you give to someone in such a dictator game, he will share with somebody. And this, from the perspective that expecting all humans should be selfish, was a surprise. And that has been the basis, for the big claim that humans are especially cooperative, and that needed to be explained. Recently, however, people have come out from Europe and the States and have compared here 16 different human groups and have observed to their surprise that the tendency to share in the same dictator game adapted to the kind of socioeconomic conditions of the different groups that have been studied can vary tremendously. And that actually the US or the Occidental human population is a kind of the extreme for the tendency of sharing, and that it can be much, much lower. One of the discussion was when we were trying to explain this very high proportion of sharing was also that you can have, and that has been observed in some of these interactions, in that case it was not the dictator game but the ultimate game, where actually the second individual to which the amount of money is proposed can refuse if he wants, and then nobody gets any money. And this refusal was a kind of a measure of the social norm within a group of what is the expectation. Then actually you observe that sometimes you have third-party punishment. Individuals who are not part in this dialectical relationship would punish the one who is sharing if the sharing is perceived as not corresponding to the social norm of the group they belong to. And this has been studied also in this comparative approach and has shown that actually the tendency to punish is equally extremely influenced by these ecological conditions under which the human groups you study. So that, for example, the Hadza, who was also a group who is sharing in the dictator game a very small amount, are actually never punishing. So showing you, that we have, and actually in this comparison is not comparing the group we're studying, is not including the Occidental group, but the Occidental population would be also at the far right here, and tends to be also always a kind of an outlier in the important diversity you see in different human societies. Following on the idea that the cognition is a kind of a adaptation to the ecological conditions, you can find different aspects of human cognition that is very strongly affected by the ecology under which the humans are living. Here I was comparing the spatial skills in different human groups, and the VCMC here is a Western middle-class individuals that have under different way of looking at our space around us that does not always concur with other human groups. What I find fascinating is that also within a same human group, you can be finding strong differences. And if you take the socioeconomic status of the individuals you want to study, you can see that actually the socioeconomic status can have a very strong influence on different cognitive aspects, like here, the language complexity, the richness of the vocabulary, the cognitive conflict composite, how well we respond on cognitive tests when we have conflicting demands, and the working memories. And even more striking to me, at least, is that when you are growing under different socioeconomic conditions within the same society, there is also an influence on the brain development and the way the brain is going to react. And here you see the response of the brain when they are finding themselves in such a conflict situation. And you can see here that for unattended conflict situation, you have a difference in the production of, what is it? The response, I measured in electricity here. So that you have within the same population, according to the sexual image status, different aspects of the cognitive development is influenced, as well as the brain development. And this is just an example. In this paper, they are reviewing some of the evidences that has been found in humans. There is a dramatic, well-known case of the orphans in Romania who were in this orphanage in Bucharest, have been studied, and here again, they were able to show that the production of oxytocin is being influenced by the living conditions that the infants have been faced, so that actually the individuals who have been in this orphanage in kind of socially deprived environment have a lower level of production of oxytocin that is helping very tremendously in social conflicts and in these kind of situations. Recently it was also shown that in some cases you can actually, through training, you can actually improve the cognitive performance. And what is fascinating, that was published in PNAS last year, or 2 years ago now, what is fascinating is that actually not only the cognitive abilities you are trained about is going to be improved, but related cognitive abilities that are not directly trained are going to be improved through the training. Another ecological dimension, I mentioned it to start with, is the laboratory. And Levitt and List have been especially vocal in making us aware that the laboratory results is in many situations not always representative of how we humans behave in the real world. And here you have the results of what kind of amount of money we would be willing to pay for cards for some kind of sport players if we were in the lab or if we were in the real world. And you see there is a strong difference, and humans are much more generous when they are in the lab than in reality, which actually for some of us should have actually already ring the bell in you when you heard that, you know, humans in the States or in Europe, when they receive a certain amount of money, are spontaneously going to share 40 to 42% of their money with an anonymous person. I don't know how many of you have tried to work in a charity and tried to get some money from people in the streets. You are absolutely aware that it's never going to be so easy. So what to do with the lab results? And they have made a long paper where they really, their conclusion is because the lab systematically differs from most naturally occurring environment on these dimensions, experiments may not always yield results that are readily generalizable. And just to take you a few examples, in this famous dictatorial ultimate game, if you change the amount of money you give to the individual to share, this is going to have a dramatic effect on the amount of offer that is being given. If you change the condition of anonymity in the experiments, you have a dramatic change again. And if you, for example, instead of saying you have to give, you give the possibility for the person, the actor, to take from the other one, you see again a tremendous difference in the amount that is being exchanged between the two individuals. And that are the reason with many other examples is economists have been actually starting to be extremely careful in looking at what are the conditions during the experiments that influence the way the humans are sharing. That's why they are claiming we have to be extremely careful about using lab experiment results in humans to understand the behavior of all of us in the real world. Here's another example that was published a few months about the famous public good games where the deviation, which are these wide open circles from not giving, has been shown as an example of our tendency to cooperate, to share, to big altruism. They have redone this experiment, but in one conditions, they have set it in such a way that actually the selfish condition is to cooperate. And these are the black square. And to your surprise, you see that when it benefits to cooperate, even from the individual personal point of view, humans are not systematically cooperating. There is a strong difference from what we observe to the 100%. And this has been argued to say that it's actually not the pro-social preference that is driving our behavior, but there is a lot of kind of social baggage that the individuals come and bring with them into the lab. So I think in humans, we have a lot of data showing very clearly that we cannot think of humans as being, you know, machines, and that we really need to take into account the ecology for understanding cooperation and altruism. At the last minute, I had to add this kind of second line because I'm sometimes surprised that we would be seriously thinking that animals, that humans are not social, and that is a little bit something that has been kind of puzzling me. Diversity of performance is the rule rather than the exception, and I think, you know, we know that chimpanzees are our closest living relative, and so I think all what we have seen in humans should make us think about, you know, in how much that is the same thing we can observe there. Obviously, if you take a really pure Cartesian approach, you would see, say, Christophe Boesch, you're totally wrong. Chimps are machines, we all know that, and human not. That's clear. So let's try to see a little bit what we can see in terms of how the ecology plays a role in chimpanzees. And here there was an experiment where they have compared the performance of chimpanzees with the black circle with capuchin monkeys in the white circles, if they have given the possibilities to repeat experiments and therefore to learn from their experiments. You know that psychologists sometimes say that it's very important to do only one experiment and to look at the reaction of the individual at the very first one. And so here you see actually that chimpanzees are learning and improving. Here's the number of errors they are producing. As they are able to repeat, they make less and less errors. And very intriguing, the capuchin seems not to be learning something. So I don't know exactly what we should make out of it, but obviously there seems to be here a difference. This one slide is actually showing exactly the same thing. Another thing we have been seeing is that in humans, the way you give a test in a laboratory may have a very important influence in the way the humans are reacting to the test. And so obviously we could ask ourselves if something is similar in humans. Here Keith Jensen from Mike Tomazello's group has done this ultimate game with chimpanzees. You probably have seen it. And the main result was this slide, graphic, where he's showing a very strong difference in the way the humans in white and the chimpanzees are reacting to different inequity proposals. And humans would reject, whereas as you see the chimpanzee seems to be accepting whatever offer they receive. And the conclusion was, chimpanzees are maximizing their self-benefit. Humans have a sense of fairness, and that is what is guiding their behavior, and chimpanzees have no sense of fairness. Beside the fact, as I mentioned in the early slide, that these are purely a captive group, and so chimpanzees in this sense is wrong. Another group has been looking at it and repeated the experiment, but by changing a little bit the conditions so that the refusal, if you refuse, becomes more costly. Because the basic set of the experiment is that the offer was made. If you refused it, you had to wait for 1 minute, and after this minute, a new proposal would come. So if you want, the cost of the refusal would be 1 minute. And they changed that, and they repeated the experiment by putting another condition where you had to wait 5 minutes, so that the refusal would become, time-wise at least, more costly. And if you make it more costly, you would see that the human groups would here parallel exactly what you observe in chimps and would become maximizers. So that here they are saying what we have been observed here in terms of differences in the notion of fairness is basically more a difference in terms of perception of the cost of refusing. And that is here a notion of how time is being perceived between different species. So going back, oh no, not back because we haven't been yet, going in the wild, so in more typical wild conditions, comparisons have been done in the hunting behavior of chimpanzees in different populations, and here it's 4 different populations, Gombe, Mahale, Tai, and Gogo, and you see on the left the proportion, the tendency of the chimpanzees to hunt in group when they are hunting for the same species of prey, which are red colobus. Red colobus lives and moves high up in the trees. And on the right, it's whenever they hunt in group, how frequently do they collaborate between the individuals hunters. And you see that in both cases, you have very strong, important differences between the population of chimpanzees that are considered. I just added here that in some cases, the demographic conditions of the groups are such that the cooperative behavior in hunting for group can be quite large, because the average hunting group size in Gogo, that is especially large chimpanzees community, is about 14 individuals. So sometimes you have over 20 adult males hunting together on the same group of red colobus monkeys. The reason why this difference is so big, I propose that it has something to do with the fact of how the ecology of hunting makes the hunting difficult. And basically the big difference I see, I visited all these groups also, populations, sorry, is that in Thai, the hunting takes place in the continuous, intact primary forest, where the prey can escape in all possible directions. Whereas in Gombe, Mahale, and Gogo, many parts of the forest are secondarized, are interrupted, so that basically the individual, when they are hunting, can even alone succeed by cornering the red colobus monkeys at the edge of the forest, and this makes the capture much more easy. So that actually the success of a solitary hunter is in Gombe, Mahale, and Gogo much higher than in Thai. So when do wild chimpanzees cooperate? As I just mentioned, collaborative hunting is a function of the possible difficulties to achieve a capture, and cooperative hunting has been seen in all chimpanzee population for territorial defense. Territorial defense, and has been also used as a kind of a precursor for war, is a typical characteristic of the chimpanzees. And the third ecological domain where we have observed cooperation, very important cooperation, is in predator defense. So that chimpanzee population that suffer from a high predation pressure have been seen to develop strong cooperation to protect themselves from these predators. On the altruistic part, meat sharing, I skip this one. Okay, sorry, I'm shifting. Actually, I wanted just to say that cooperative experiments done in captivity have found mixed results. In some cases, they found evidence for cooperation. In other cases, it didn't. Wasn't very clear. Important is simply to notice that in none of those experiments were the ecological context relevant to cooperation in the wild chimpanzees used. And therefore, I think the ecological validity of captivity is questionable to study such a cognitive ability. Altruistic sharing in the wild chimpanzees have been observed in many cases. Interestingly enough, here again, we seem to be seeing differences between different chimpanzee groups. In Thai, for example, we see that about 50% of the sharing is either passive or active. By active is meant the meat owner is facilitating the access to the meat to the one who wants to beg, whereas active sharing seems to be, for meat, much less frequent in Gombe than in Thai. And very interestingly, this passive sharing that is so frequent in Gombe seems to be resulting from a kind of a harassment by the beggar, where they have seen behaviors that for me is totally puzzling, because it's totally absent in Thai, where you have the beggar actively, physically preventing the meat owner from eating by placing the hand, their hand when they are begging, on the mouth of the meat owner so that he can't eat, or by putting their hand on the meat to pull it away from the meat owner. They are not stealing it, they are just preventing him to be able to eat. And this behavior we have never, in 30 years, seen in Thai. Another puzzling difference is that tool-acquired food is, in the case of nuts, very regularly shared between mother and infant. And in Gombe, for termite, it has never been seen. And that is very strange. No active sharing, no facilitation to access to acquired food in Gombe. And in some case, okay, you are going to tell me here it's a termite, it's a bit different. But in some cases, we have observed for honey of driver ants, also chimpanzees using sticks. And in those cases, we also see active sharing of the stick, of what is on the stick, between mother and infant in Thai. And that seems to be so rare in Gombe. Altruism was a paper, this is Freddy, an adult male, as you can see. He has surprised me and all the researchers in Thai by carrying this baby, who's 2.5 years old, on his back for 7 months, and sharing his nets with him, and sharing food, and sharing, here are the list of the behaviors we saw of these males. Important is to simply see that half of the orphans in Thai chimpanzees are adopted, and half of these adoptions are done by males. And in 4 cases, 3 cases to be more precise, we could actually genetically confirm that these males were not the father of the little one. In one case, Freddy Victor, the father of Victor is alive in the group, but he was not the one caring for the infant. And to put that in perspective, important is to realize that we have made an analysis showing that the males in Thai seems to be able to recognize their own infant and are playing systematically more with their own infant than with other infants of the same age in the group. So the context in which we have observed altruism in wild chimpanzees is for sharing for rich and clubbed food, that is seen in all populations, adoption of orphans by males and females. Females adoptees have been seen in all chimpanzee populations, helping of threatened individuals in the case of predator attacks also, and this tending of injured individuals. And that is also something very puzzling to me, because obviously injured individuals happens normally in normal life, actually social life, especially in chimpanzees where males sometimes can be quite aggressive. But this tending in Gombe is restricted to closely related individuals, mother, infant, siblings, but otherwise has not been observed. And that's very different from Thai. So here we have actually a similar situation, so that captive experiments have found very mixed results. Some have been concluded that it's actually absent for food, or it never occurs spontaneously. Here again I want to say that the ecological context that we know is relevant for altruism in wild chimpanzees has never been tested in the wild, in captive conditions, sorry. And so that I think the ecological validity of captivity is questionable. So we have to realize that cooperation and altruism are social behavior, and it's within a given ecology. And some very specific socio-ecological context seems to favor these behaviors in the wild. And the captive situation, because it's captive, you know, a part of this fact that it's not ecologically relevant is obvious. I'm not saying it's a mistake, it's simply its captive conditions. So to finish, a few thoughts about lab work. What can we do with lab work? Should we do or not lab work? In the case of humans, Levitt and List have been studying that very well, and they say, yes, we can do lab work, but under some conditions. The first is that we need to know the behavior we want to study in details in the real world. The second is that we need then to parallel in the lab the behavior we want to study from what is known in the wild, and then concentrate on some of the parameters that are sometimes very difficult indeed to study in the real world. So I would suggest exactly the same thing to proceed if you want to work with chimpanzees in captive conditions, is that we need to concentrate on behaviors that we know are relevant, important in wild populations, and then develop valid procedures and questions. And please don't underestimate the trauma of captivity. I think Hans Kummer's classic experiments on Hamadryas baboons, where he was studying the respect of female ownership, shows an example of how you can combine, captive experiments to understand the specific mechanism of behavior that has been observed in the wild. And recently, the work that has been done on some bird about the cache behavior is exactly the same approach, or the work of Psari Redwan and his colleagues on the cooperation in fishes, for example, shows how this behavior can be done, these experiments in laboratory can be done to specifically understand some of the mechanisms related of behaviors we see in the wild. My take-home message: claims have to be population and ecological sensitive. And if you do cross-species conclusion, I think even more sensitivity is required if you think you have two species where you have different population, all of them showing some diversity in the behaviors you want to compare. As for me, up to now, we have not been able to show anything that is in cooperation and altruism uniquely human. And all what we see in our data is that we have a strong ecological adaptation of chimpanzees and humans for the way to react to cooperation, and by cooperation altruism. Thank you for your attention.